The opinions voiced in this show are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which investments may be appropriate for you, consult with your attorney, accountant, and financial advisor or tax advisor prior to investing. Investment advice offered through Fragasso Financial Advisors, a registered investment advisor.
Welcome to The Advisor, presented by Fragasso Financial Advisors. This is Marcia Posset, Marketing Manager at Fragasso and radio show producer. I'm here today with Bob Fragasso and Mike Furtick.
Hi, everyone.
Hello, everybody.
And our special guest in the studio today is Dan Dingus, who is the president of Fragasso Financial Advisors.
Hello.
And Dan, can you take a moment to tell us more about your background and experience?
Thank you, Marcia. I've been with Fragasso for well over a decade now. I came from the institutional money side here in Pittsburgh, working with a number of large firms here. And recently, before Fragasso, I was part of a team that managed $11 billion in institutional asset monies. And been with the firm now for that 10 years, and it's been wonderful.
Thanks for joining us. And Bob, can you take a moment to remind our listeners the purpose of our show?
Well, we are here to provide helpful information to you, our listeners, as a guide in your financial journey. And we're also looking to bring expert opinion and analysis to you.
And I'll remind folks that Fragasso Financial Advisors is primarily a fee-based investment management firm working on a platform of holistic financial planning. We provide advice for individuals, retirement plans, as well as foundations and endowments. And we have locations in downtown Pittsburgh. We also have in the South Hills an office in Bethel Park, and in the North Hills in Wexford. We are a team and group of certified financial planner practitioners. That's the CFP designation that you'll see sometimes after someone's name, and that's a long, hard-fought designation to get, and we've got several folks who have that designation. Additionally, Chartered Financial Analyst, CFA. We had some folks last week who are Chartered Financial Analysts. That's another very long, hard-fought designation to achieve. Accredited investment fiduciaries, portfolio managers. All in all, Fragasso employs about 50 professionals, and that ranges from the financial advisors to the portfolio management team, as well as our administrative, operational, and marketing and retirement plan services personnel. And again, we provide advice for individuals, retirement plans, and endowments and foundations. And today's topic, Bob, is the investment advisor of the future. And I'm going to ask you to just talk to our audience about how that affects them, the investment advisor of the future, and where things are going. Why should folks care about that?
Oh, they should care. The composition of the investment industry is changing. And the listener might say, well, that means something to you. You're in the industry. It doesn't mean anything to me. And that would be wrong as a conclusion. This impacts how investors will get their information and guidance. The kinds of investment products that they would be able to use, all of it is up for grabs at this point. And if you consider that for 200 years, from before the founding of our republic until the 1970s, the investment industry didn't change. It was done. The only change was they came inside from outdoors into a coffee house early on, and then from then on, the exchanges stayed the same. But then it changed a lot in the 1970s with the breakup of fixed commissions. And it was cataclysmic. I've mentioned on the show before that Mayday is the like the airplane that's in trouble, was the call sign for May 1st, 1975, when commissions became unfixed. The whole industry changed cataclysmically. Well, we're there now. What's happening right now is that magnitude of change. Traditional brokerage firms are searching for the right value proposition. I said brokerage firms. I didn't say advisory firms. Brokerage firms are searching for the right value proposition to remain relevant in today's investment world. There is a tension between the investment product manufacturers and distributors and the fiduciary investment role that the regulatory agencies want advisors to provide to investors. We'll talk more about that momentarily. So since the 1970s, there has been a movement toward investors handling their own investments, and that has accelerated with the proliferation of financial information. A move toward internet delivery of investment services and information can be both good and bad. An important and potentially costly question is how an investor will make sense of today's marketplace of information and choices.
Yeah, and Bob, I'm going to come back to a couple of things that you said there before, especially as it relates to advisory firms versus brokerage firms, because I think that distinction maybe we need to get more clear in the audience's mind. But before we go there were some other things that you mentioned, and so I'm thinking maybe a history of the industry, because you mentioned a few things there. So maybe you can take us through in a little more detail how we got from where they were back in the 70s to where we are now. Could you walk us through that a little bit more?
Yeah, I can't prove this, but I think more than 50% of our listeners are not interested in history. But I think 100% of our listeners would be interested in history if they understand its replicating nature and the fact that it impacts us today, if we get a sense of the cycles and the trends. So if we go back to that May 1st, 1975, May Day, where fixed commissions became unfixed, and there were partners capital firms. Here in Pittsburgh, partners capital firm, meaning firms that, so back then it was mostly guys, a bunch of guys would put together. There were some avant-garde women, one in Pittsburgh, one in New York, but it was that rare, put together their capital and they started a brokerage firm to do transactions. When as of May 1st, 1975, that all went out the window. That wasn't a reason to exist any longer. And the industry struggled to find a value proposition to offer to investors because being the sole portal to get investments was no longer their reason for existing. So they had to come up with other things. And also commensurate with that, and this is really important to understanding what's going on today, investment firms started to, first of all, the partners capital firms couldn't compete. And so what was then called national firms, and they weren't really national. They had offices across the country, but it was New York, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Cleveland. It wasn't Main Street. The national firms truly started to become national by absorbing the partners capital firms. Or the partners capital firms, if they weren't efficient, just went out of business with the partners. The partners went over to work for those big brokerage firms. And that was a major, major metamorphosis of our industry. But it also impacted how investors got their investment advice, got their investments, how they made decisions. And those large firms had a compression of their commissions because then commissions were discounted. Because once you give free pricing, as we all should, it's a free marketplace and that's the best, then prices will go down because of competition. Well, those big brokerage firms had to start manufacturing their own product so they could get a manufacturing margin along with the agency commission that they were getting that was greatly compressed. Well, if you think about that for a second, that lends itself to a lot of conflicts of interest. I'm selling you the product I manufacture. So will I recommend someone else's product or my product? So it spiraled slowly until the 1990s into the 2000s, and culminating in the Great Recession of 07 through 09, where proprietary product bias became a malaise that threatened to bring down our economy. It was that major of an evolution. So what it means today is investors have to sort out who's giving them their advice. What is the advisor's agenda? Am I selling the internal products? I often say my automotive salesman is a very knowledgeable product person, but he's not my automotive consultant. He's not going to guide me through all of the nameplates and populate my garages with the right mix of cars. For me, he's going to sell me his automobiles. And that's what's true in the investment industry to a large part today. So go all the way back to the Depression. There was a law called Glass-Steagall, and it separated the ills of investment banking, product manufacturing, from brokerage, product representation to the public. And because of the ills that were fostered on the public way back in the late 1920s that contributed to many experts believe contributed to the crash and the depression, that was separated. Well, along this same time, because of all of those mandates to generate revenues and increase profits, Glass-Steagall was repealed. So now we're back to manufacturing product and offering it to the public. It's a bit of a buyer beware situation. But here, the hoofs you hear galloping in the background are the regulatory agencies, and they're coming up giving some mandates, which we're going to get into in a little bit. And I think you want to ask.
Let's talk about that. We'll go into something that happened very recently. In fact, it might have been yesterday, but it was certainly within the last couple of days, and that is the DOL, the Department of Labor, who has been kind of wrestling with this issue for quite some time. But then just yesterday, I think they postponed the ruling on the fiduciary rule. And maybe you can talk about kind of what that means to today's investor.
Yeah, it's a big change. And as Bob talked about May Day, the Department of Labor fiduciary rules. And at a high level, what this means is, they're separating and the brokerage, which follows a suitability standard, which means that basically it doesn't have to be in your best interest, but it just needs to be suitable.
So the brokerage firms have suitability standard.
Absolutely, which in all cases is a lower standard than a fiduciary standard, which means that it has to be in your best interest. That's a clear distinction that I think a lot of people need to fully understand. And the Department of Labor is wrestling with this, and the industry is fighting it. And it's a real problem out there that a lot of firms are ill prepared for. And I think it's essentially the biggest change in our industry since May 1st, 1975.
And the industry has grappled and been whipsawed on this over the last 2 years, and we're going to come back to that.
That's right. We'll pick up in a few minutes about how today's investment industry impacts you, our listeners. But before we do so, I want to remind you of that you can take part in our show. You can submit questions anytime on our website at fragasoadvisors.com/radio, and that's FRAGASSOADVISORS.com/radio. And this week we're offering a new white paper which summarizes today's radio show topic titled The Investment Industry and Where Do You Fit? So take advantage of this and many other free downloads on the radio page of Fragaso's website.
The opinions voiced in this show are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which investments may be appropriate for you, consult with your attorney, accountant, and financial advisor or tax advisor prior to investing. Investment advice offered through Fragasso Financial Advisors, a registered investment advisor.